The United States Bicentennial Quarter dollar, dated 1776 to 1976, with the Denver mintmark, D, is one of those coins that shows up everywhere, in loose change, in old jars, in Grandpa's drawer. Yet it carries a surprising amount of history, symbolism, political pride, and mid-American vibes packed into a tiny piece of copper-nickel sandwich metal. This coin wasn't just another quarter rolling out of the presses. It was part of a massive nationwide celebration of America's anniversary of independence, a moment when the United States wanted to flex its heritage, honor its founders, and give everyday people a keepsake that tied them directly to the country's story. Instead of the usual single-year date, the quarter carries a dual date, 1776 to 1976, representing the span from the Declaration of Independence to the bicentennial year, which immediately sets it apart from normal circulating quarters. Minted in 1975 and 1976, it's iconic for having no coins dated 1975. The U.S. Mint paused regular dates and produced only these special bicentennial-type coins for 2 years straight. The design is equally special. The obverse still features George Washington, based on the classic John Flanagan portrait used since 1932, but slightly modified by Frank Gasparo for sharper details. The reverse, though, is the real rock star of the coin, a design by Jack L. Ahr featuring a colonial drummer, often casually called the Drummer Boy Quarter. Behind the drummer is a victory torch surrounded by 13 stars, symbolizing the original 13 colonies, and the whole layout feels like a blend of Revolution-era grit and 1970s patriotic flair. The Denver Mint was absolutely cranking these out, striking more than 860 million circulation quality examples, which is why the coin is common today, even after decades of pockets, piggy banks, and vending machines. Composition-wise, your standard 1976 D quarter is the usual copper-nickel clad, a pure copper core with outer layers of 75% copper and 25% nickel, ringing slightly duller than its silver cousins. There are special 40% silver bicentennial quarters, but those were only sold in special collector sets and have an S mint mark. So in 1976, D is the regular clad version meant for everyday spending. Even though it's common, it's beloved because it marks the first and only time the quarter ever changed its reverse design before the 1999 state quarters program launched decades later. Historically, the coin sits in an era when America was dealing with the Cold War, inflation, the aftermath of the Vietnam War, and a cultural push to rediscover American identity. So the bicentennial projects, including coins, stamps, fireworks, parades, TV specials, and memorabilia, were meant to boost national pride and unity. For collectors, condition is everything. A standard circulated 1976 D quarter is usually worth its spending value, but sharp, mint-state examples with perfect luster, especially in high grades like MS66 or MS67, can pull respectable premiums because of how hard it is to find a flawless strike among hundreds of millions. There are also a few fun varieties, like double dies or die cracks, but nothing too extreme. It's the general historical context, the beloved drummer design, and the nostalgia factor that give this piece its charm. And honestly, the coin just feels like the 1970s. A little bold, a little dramatic, proudly patriotic, and full of that "we're celebrating something big" energy that marked the bicentennial craze. Whether you're holding it as a collector, a history lover, or just someone curious about that little drummer guy, the 1976 D Bicentennial Quarter is basically a pocket-sized tribute to America's founding, carrying 200 years of story in a single, shiny slice of metal next top two. The 1980 United States quarter dollar, struck at the Philadelphia Mint, sits in a fascinating moment of American coinage history, blending economic stress, rising metal costs, and shifting minting technology into a coin that millions of people handle daily without realizing the subtle story tucked inside its copper-nickel shell. At the center of the design, of course, is George Washington, whose portrait by sculptor John Flanagan, originally engraved for the 1932 bicentennial of Washington's birth, remained unchanged for decades and carried with it the classic early sculptural style that favored straightforward realism over stylized modernism, meaning that by 1980 the obverse design already had nearly half a century of service. But interestingly, despite the long use, these in quarters developed their own character because the Mint's master hubs had been reworked multiple times, causing subtle differences in relief, hair texture, and rim definition compared to earlier strikes. The year 1980 marked a transition era for the U.S. Mint. America was wrestling with inflation, metal prices were climbing, and copper had become too expensive for the government to use in its old pure copper penny designs. Though quarters had already been shifted to a copper-nickel clad composition in 1965, with a pure copper center sandwiched between two nickel-rich layers, a structure created to mimic the silver shine of the earlier 90% silver quarters without the cost. This composition now defined the look and feel of the Washington quarter, and by 1980 it had become completely normal for a generation that never knew the weight of silver coins in circulation. The Philadelphia Mint, once famous for never using mint marks, had only recently begun placing a P on its coins in 1980 for the first time in U.S. history on the quarter denomination, which makes this coin historically significant. It's the first year that Philadelphia quarters ever carried a P mint mark, carving 1980 into numismatic books as the beginning of modern mint mark standardization. Production was enormous. The mint struck over 635 million 1980 P quarters, a tidal wave of coins flowing into the American economy at a time when cash-based transactions still dominated everyday life across the country. And because of this massive mintage, most examples are extremely common in circulation today. Though surprisingly, high-grade uncirculated or sharply struck specimens can be challenging because the mint was pushing its presses hard to meet increased demand during a period of economic turbulence. On the reverse, Flanagan's stylized heraldic eagle, bold wings outstretched, perched upon a bundle of arrows with an olive branch below, symbolized the classic American balance between readiness and peace, though artists and historians have long pointed out that the proportions of the eagle feel slightly compressed compared to earlier 19th century depictions, a result of the mint's desire for a simple, easily reproducible emblem suitable for mass production in a high-wear denomination like the quarter. The coin measures 24.3 millimeters in diameter, weighs 5.67 grams, and contains no silver, yet its durability and recognizable feel made it one of the most dependable circulating coins of the era. Collectors often note that the Philadelphia strikes of 1980 vary in clarity. Some show mushy details in Washington's hair and lower-relief eagle feathers due to worn dyes, while others exhibit crisp rims and better contrast, hinting at fresher dyes or improved striking pressure. This variability creates subtle collectible interest for specialists who study dye states, strike characteristics, and minting patterns of the late century. Historically, the 1980 P quarter also represents the last phase before a wave of modernization that would radically reshape U.S. coinage in the 1990s, including better die-making technology, the redesign of the reverse for the 50-state quarters program beginning in 1999, and later the introduction of laser-engraved master hubs. So in a sense, the 1980 P is one of the final old-school quarters still made under the older mechanical processes of the century. In circulation, these coins lived hard lives: parking meters, payphones, laundromats, arcade machines, vending machines, bus fare boxes, and thus most surviving pieces show scratches, dull luster, rim nicks, and general wear that smooths Washington's cheek and erases the fine feather lines on the eagle. But a sharply preserved, uncirculated example gleams with the bright satin silver tone typical of 1980 Philadelphia issues, reflecting the mint's effort to maintain reliable mass production despite economic pressure. Numismatically, the coin generally holds face value unless found in high mint state grades, especially or higher, where it becomes desirable to registry collectors who chase condition rarity rather than mintage rarity. A few known die varieties exist, such as minor double dies or die clash marks, though none are considered major national-level varieties. Overall, the 1980 P. Washington quarter stands as a snapshot of an America balancing tradition with the early tension of economic change, a common coin with uncommon background, and a quiet milestone in mint mark history, carrying the first proud P ever placed on a Philadelphia quarter and anchoring its place in the long narrative of U.S. coinage next top 3. The 1981 P United States quarter dollar, bearing the familiar bust of George Washington on its obverse and the heraldic eagle on its reverse, sits in an intriguing moment of late 20th century U.S. numismatic history, a time when the mint was transitioning from the early years of copper-nickel-clad coinage into the more refined, high-volume production style that would define American circulating coins for the next 2 decades. Minted at the Philadelphia Mint, identified by the small but clear P. Mint mark to the right of Washington's ponytail. This coin represents one of the earlier years in which Philadelphia regularly placed its letter on circulating quarters, a change that had only begun in 1980, giving the 1981 P quarter a place in the evolution of U.S. mintmark practices, especially after more than 170 years in which Philadelphia coins had gone unmarked. Struck in massive quantities, over 300 million, the 1981 P quarter's composition follows the post-1965 clad standard of a pure copper core bonded to outer layers of 75% copper and 25% nickel, giving the coin its silvery color and durability, while also allowing it to maintain a similar electromagnetic signature to the old silver quarters for vending machine compatibility, even though silver coinage had ended in circulation some 15 years earlier. The obverse, designed originally in 1932 by sculptor John Flanagan, carries Washington's left-facing portrait along with the inscriptions Liberty, Indiana God We Trust, and the date 1981, with subtle stylistic characteristics, such as the depth of the jawline, the sharpness of the bow and the tied hair, and the spacing of the lettering, serving as diagnostic clues for specialists studying the small variations that naturally appear in massive annual production runs. On the reverse, the powerful eagle with outstretched wings perches on a bundle of arrows, symbolizing readiness to defend the nation, while the olive branches beneath signify the desire for peace, flanked by the inscriptions United States of America, E pluribus unum, and $quarter, a design that had been in place since the coin's bicentennial redesign concluded in 1977 after the temporary drummerboy reverse. Even though the 1981 quarter is not considered rare, its place in the series matters because of the broader context of early 1980s minting. The mint was improving its presses, tightening die polishing practices, and dealing with rapidly increasing national demand for coins, meaning that some 1981 P examples show minor die deterioration, clash marks, or weak strikes, small quirks that collectors enjoy cataloging because they add personality to an otherwise common date. Since the 1981 P came out at a time when the mint produced no quarter mint sets for public purchase. 1981 mint sets were made, but special burnished finishes had not yet begun. Finding superb high-grade circulation strikes can be unexpectedly challenging, and the top-graded coins, those that achieve MS-66 or MS-67, at grading services, can command solid collector interest because uncirculated examples tend to show contact marks from bulk handling. Historically, the coin also fits into the economic landscape of early Reagan-era America, when inflation, high interest rates, and heavy coin circulation meant quarters took a beating in daily use, which is why clean, lustrous, well-struck survivors stand out today. Visually, the 1981 P quarter surfaces often show a slightly darker clad tonality than earlier 1970s examples, with many pieces exhibiting light satiny luster, though stored specimens can sometimes develop subtle gold, blue, or champagne toning due to the copper-nickel alloy interacting with air over decades. While its face value remains 25 cents and most circulated examples are worth face value, the coin's true charm lies in its role as a snapshot of American minting at the dawn of modern mass production consistency, bridging the gap between mid-century artistry and late-century industrial precision, and for collectors who enjoy assembling complete Washington Quarter series from 1932 to 1998, the final year of the Eagle reverse before the State Quarters era. The 1981 P is a necessary, historically grounded piece, familiar, common, yet quietly significant, a sturdy little artifact of everyday American life that has now spent over 4 decades traveling through pockets, cash registers, bank rolls, and collections, carrying with it the national story in miniature.